Erin Bradley, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Matt. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, anytime I get to chat with somebody that is an outdoors woman that likes wealth building, that is in GoBundance, the women's GoBundance, and is, looking for ways to add value to other people, I always know it's going to be a great conversation. So I'm glad to have you join today.
I know it's going to be fun.
So for those that don't know about kind of your journey and where you got started, I'm always just curious on where kind of the entrepreneurial starting point began for you and what led you to that starting point.
Well, it's funny. I didn't think I was going to, I don't know why my brain just went here, but I typically start that story when I fell into the mortgage business in '06. And then I was like this free spirit, traveler for several years after college. I lived overseas and did a lot of adventuring, and then was really resisting the call to what my siblings had done, which was get a good business degree, go to a good college, and then go straight into corporate America. I'm the youngest of 5 kids from the East Coast. My dad was a stockbroker and financial planner. So there was a very prescribed path that everybody was following. And I was like the black sheep who wanted to go the other way for a little while until I found my way into the mortgage world, 5 years after graduating from college. But it's funny because when you said, where did my entrepreneurial journey start? It just started making me laugh because it started earlier than that, when I was actually living overseas in Barcelona and I was teaching English, but barely scraping by and having a really hard time finding work as somebody who didn't have working papers over there. And so I remember after signing a lease for an apartment and realizing I didn't have enough money for rent, that we saw guys selling beers out of backpacks at like the beach and at the park and stuff like that, and at the music festivals. And there was this music festival happening at this plaza up the street from our apartment. So I convinced my 2 American girlfriends that if they could do it, so could we. So we filled up a trash bag full of beers and ice and put it in a roller bag and brought it up to the corner. And we just stood on the corner saying, cerveza, un euro. You buy the cans of beer for 35 cents at this little corner shop and sell them for $1. And so we did that until we made enough money for rent. We just kept going back to the shop, filling up the trash bag. But I've never actually shared that story on a podcast. So thanks for asking.
That was your first real experience with arbitrage, right?
Totally. It was then that I realized, you know what, I'm going to be fine. No matter what happens, I'm going to figure this out. And so that takes me to when I did fall into the mortgage business. After all this traveling I had been doing, I felt this call to a career that would be location independent. Like there was no version of me locked and loaded at a desk all day, every day. I wanted to be able to travel and adventure. And so I saw the salespeople coming in the office in jeans and a t-shirt and doing yoga in the middle of the day. And then they would put on their suit and go to closing. And I'm like, that's the life for me. I'm going to be a salesperson. I'm going to go 100% commission. But I did so with zero safety net, probably negative financial, if I'm honest, and definitely no systems and certainly no confidence when it comes to anything related to sales. And so within a year, I was flat on my face, 35 grand in credit card debt, maxed on all my credit cards. I got a lead for a new client, and it was the summer in July in Denver. And I was meeting this guy at a Starbucks 5 miles away, but I didn't have enough money for gas. So I just rode my bike, and I had to figure out, what should I wear that I can ride a bike functionally and still look professional? And I was like, I got to get there early too, to let the sweat dry off, because I don't want this guy to know I had to ride my bike. And I get there early. And unfortunately, the client did too. And he walked up to me at the counter at Starbucks as my credit card was being declined for a $2 cup of coffee. And I'm telling you, Matt, I didn't know what to do, because I honestly thought that was the card that would work. So I just didn't want to try another card and have it be declined in front of him. So I just lied. And I was like, that's so weird. I'm going to have to call the bank. That's my debit card. Must be something going on with my card. And he bought my coffee. And I was just like, oh my God, financial rock bottom, just mortified. And I'm embarrassed to admit we were getting married a week or so later. And I remember coming home to my husband and being like, thank God we invited 230 people to the wedding, because, sometimes people give cash gifts. I'm like, that's how we're going to pay our mortgage. So yeah, it wasn't a pretty start. And it just kind of evolved from there. And I ended up calling my dad for advice that day, because he had gone 100% commission in his 20s. I just said, this is so much harder than I thought. I really had no clue what I was getting myself into when I went 100% commission. I just wanted freedom and flexibility. And that's not what this feels like. So what am I supposed to do here? And he said, you know what, if you think you're going to be good at this someday, then you just do whatever it takes. And so I opened another card. I bought internet leads, whatever that means, in 2008. And I mean, I got into the business as the market was crashing into the mortgage world.
Yeah.
So I only had one way to go but up. So my perspective was a blessing, if I'm honest, because I was coming from nothing while other people were crashing. I was just getting started. So I hired a coach, and that was the beginning of me surrounding myself with people that can see in me what I can't see in myself and help me see in them what might be possible. And so it's been a journey ever since, of trial and error and highs and lows and everything in between. But it's a fun journey. So it's still going.
Love that. It's always interesting how I had the same perspective, actually, because I came into real estate. I graduated college in 2010. So it was a little bit more post financial crisis, but still kind of bottom of the market, the economy at that point in time. And I didn't have any other perspective, but hey, this is a shitty landscape and I'm going to make the best of it and, put my best foot forward. And like you said, there were so many other people that were, coming from a long fall from where they were at to, talk a little bit about how that ignorance is bliss from your perspective and not having the skills or the confidence. How did you build it up in that initial, summit to maybe the first milestone or peak where you felt a little bit of stability, a little bit of traction? Because between the bottom and that milestone, so many people quit. How did you lead with your best foot and still find a way, lacking some of that confidence, lacking some of those skills, and really kind of facing some financial, headwinds, continue to push through to a point that allowed you to kind of start turning a corner?
Well, like I said, the first thing I did was hire a coach. And it's interesting because I've been coaching real estate agents and mortgage lenders now for the past, 8 years, I guess. And in my own journey, I see a lot of people resistant to invest in themselves. And I remember there was a clear moment where, sure, I was ashamed of my credit card debt. I felt like a failure. And I was worried, like, am I ever going to make it in this business? Am I even cut out for this? I felt like a complete imposter. And I remember thinking to myself, I almost went to grad school. So after college, I had kayaked the coast of Mexico for a month. And then I ended up in Barcelona for a couple of years. And I became fluent in Spanish. And I had actually applied to get a master's in translation and interpretation. And my path ended up diverging from that. And so first thing I told myself was, I'm not a failure because I have debt right now. Because if I had gone to grad school, I'd likely have student loan debt too.
True.
So I'm investing in myself to learn. And it's an interesting thing about entrepreneurship that we want to prove to ourselves that we can do it sometimes before we're willing to reinvest that profit back into ourselves or back into our business. We want to kind of just put our nose to the grindstone and throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks, and fingers crossed, hope for the best. And we're all winging it out there and it's messy, And so the first thing I had to do was give myself permission to be okay with where I was at. I wasn't, just because I was stumbling on my way to traction doesn't mean that I wasn't cut out for it.
Yep.
So that's number one. Number two was being willing to invest in myself and not quitting, like you said. And then in that, I just said to the coach, I'm desperate, truly. So I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And in hindsight, I think that it was great to have the coach and to be told what to do. And I followed the plan to a T, and it worked. And I started closing some deals and making money and paying my bills, but nothing extraordinary, just enough to get by, enough to not be riding my bike to client meetings. Right. And it wasn't until several years into the business, about 4 years later, actually, that I read The Go-Giver. And the Go-Giver philosophy just hit me right in the soul, that the goal is to give more in value than you hope to receive in payment. And as a salesperson with sales trainers, I had been given playbook after playbook of what to do. And it was like, do these things to get deals so you can make money, so you can pay your bills. And so even though I was mustering up the courage to execute in spite of my discomfort, I still felt misaligned because it felt really self-serving. Like I felt like everything I'm doing is to fill my void, to solve my problem. It's me, me, me. Therefore, there's resistance in the activity, and I'm going to do it because I'm desperate, but I'm not really loving it. I'm not running towards it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Once I read The Go-Giver, it was this huge paradigm shift for me because I was like, well, all these years, all my marketing, stay top of mind, ask for referrals, all that kind of stuff is all about me. Like my marketing was home improvement tips and turn back the clock reminders, and it has no bearing on what's of value to the recipient. And so all of a sudden I shifted my insecurity around making these calls, being seen as salesy. What are people going to think of me? I just replaced my insecurity with curiosity. My curiosity was, how can I be of value to somebody when they don't need my services? So if anybody's listening and they've ever been in a sales job where once you have the closing or the paycheck, whatever that means in your industry, right? In real estate and mortgage, it's like we close the deal, we make the money, and then months start going by and we're supposed to be keeping in touch with that past client. And we don't know what to say because we're thinking to ourselves, well, they don't need to buy or sell right now. It's like, yeah, you're right. They don't. That's what I need, right? That's a me problem. So if I can shift to curiosity and say, what does it mean to be of value to somebody when they don't need my services? Well, that led me to feeling compelled or unleashed in the engagement process. And in the intention to be of value, I also had to develop a community of other service providers that could be a resource to my clients when they don't need my services. And that became the turning point. So from that point forward, the strategy that developed became something that was able to double my business time and again. I started teaching it to other real estate professionals, agents, as well as the business owners in my tribe. Like I had a tribe of health and wellness professionals, financial services, home contractors, you name it, all there in my back pocket to be like my old school Rolodex, to be a problem solver to my clients when they don't need my services. And so I was able to train my clients to think of me when they need anything, which is another version of top of mind, right?
Yeah.
It's just that I felt like I could run towards that activity because if I chase that contribution, I know the dollars will follow. And it was just a complete shift of never needing to sell me anymore. Like I don't need to talk about mortgages anymore. I can just talk about what's of value to you today. And if I'm of value to you, I have no idea where that might ripple out in your life. And then it was like game over. And I as I started teaching other people the strategy, I learned I wasn't alone. Like a lot of people out there are passionate about their craft. They could be an electrician or a photographer or a real estate agent who wants to give great customer service, but there's often this disconnect between being passionate about what you do and being great at customer service and being able to find clients. And once I realized that as human beings, we all struggle with the same insecurity and overwhelm and fear and worry and burnout and exhaustion, all these things, and that the job title doesn't define us, it was easier then to build relationships that were far deeper than just clients or just a vendor list. Like it was human relationships. It was fun. It was easy. And it kind of led to everything that's followed, which was the book, Pursuing Freedom, and then the podcast and all the things. It's just, I have this deep-seated belief that, Bob Berg and John David Mann, they changed my life. And I've talked with Bob Berg. He's been on my show and I've told him this many times, like, you changed the way I thought about how I was showing up. And from that point forward, everything just has become easier. That doesn't mean there's not been failures and challenges and I haven't fallen on my face a few times, because I have. But if I just focus on chasing that intention to be of value and figuring out how to get to the bottom of what that means for somebody, and then having resources, then there should be no limit to what we can do to make an impact.
Yeah, I love that you kind of brought up the chasing contribution and just that whole paradigm shift. I think when you come from that place of scarcity, I know I did when I was first starting out, right? It was like, I just need the next paycheck.
Yes.
And it's interesting how when, you get past that threshold of like, okay, I got some stability here, I'm going to be able to pay my bills and I'm not crushing it, but I'm stable. And then your paradigm shifts a little bit around, it's almost like zooming out. And I think if everybody could have the paradigm in the context of zooming out with their relationships and how they show up to those relationships from day one, instead of it being I got to put food on the table type of urgency and kind of energy around what they do. It's hey, I'm just going to look at this from a 10 or a 20-year time horizon and trust that somewhere along that timeline, there's going to be multiple data points where I'm of value, where I'll get paid for the value I create. But let's just assume that this is the window and the box that we're playing within. And I'm just going to add value every single day or way that I can, where it feels authentic and genuine, that you can trust that that's really going to pay off for you in the long term. And it's funny, as I've gotten further into my career, and obviously I'm chasing less of the money now, and it's more about value or impact, the money continues to show up in ways that you just don't even expect it would. But then as it happens more and more, right, you start to trust in that process more and more. So it's something that I was trying to breathe into people that are early in that stage or that process, because it's like, just trust in this. It may not feel that way yet, but if you can just kind of trick your mindset and change your approach in how you do a lot of these things, you're going to get to those milestones a lot quicker.
Totally. And it's interesting you say that, because when I'm working with people or just talking to a friend who's feeling stuck, I recently read Benjamin Hardy's 10X is easier than 2X.
Good book.
You read that?
Yep.
Yeah. And it was different than what I expected it to be. It almost gave me this connotation, this 10X, like, oh, it's about hustle and 10X and grind and all this stuff. And it's not. It's about the mindset and what happens when you shift into a 10X mindset versus 2X, and how that creates sort of a filter through which you see things. And when I think back to my own personal journey, and you have that opportunity, right, that feels like it's going to be the thing that solves the problem. Like, you're stressing about money, you get that lead, you get this opportunity, you meet that person, you think like, oh my God, this is it, this is going to happen. And we're clinging on to this one thing. To me, that's the 2X, is that I need this one thing to work out. And it's so, if we, like you said, could zoom out from that and recognize that this one thing 10 years from now is not going to be the thing that defined us. And and that if we were to approach this interaction instead of from a place of, I need to get something out of this, and I have an agenda here, that if it doesn't pan out, I'm disappointed, or I feel like I'm screwed, or I feel like a failure, or whatever. And instead come into this interaction and say, if I needed nothing, like if I actually didn't need anything today, if I didn't need money, if I wasn't stressed about the problems I'm trying to solve or the void I'm trying to fill, then how would I want to show up today in every interaction, personally and professionally? And then how could I be of value? And then how will I know? How will I know unless I come from a place of curiosity? And once I had that sort of mantra, it allowed me to honestly chill out a little bit, lighten up. This isn't the end all be all. Whether this opportunity pans out or it doesn't is not going to define me 10 years from now. Only thing that's going to define me is the impact that I can have on each and every person I meet today, without needing to know what I'm going to get from it. And I know that sounds kind of woo, but it changes the frequency with which you show up to the interaction. And then that can create a much wider ripple, and you can't see how far that ripple goes. So there's a little activity that I'll do where especially at times where I feel uncertain, like I've taken a lot of leaps in my life, and on the precipice of the leap, you're about to jump off the cliff and maybe grow your wings on the way down. It's scary. So that doesn't go away necessarily. And so when you're on the brink of something that feels uncomfortable or scary, I always do this little activity where I look back on the last 12 months and I look at all the new relationships in my life, doors that opened unexpectedly, opportunities that came into my life, stars aligned, paths crossed, you name it. And as you literally just start making a list, and as you document it, you realize that most of the good things were unsolicited by the fear-based analytical brain, right? Like you and I meeting, I don't know how the stars align, but here we are connecting, hopefully adding some value to your listeners. And it wasn't because I conjured you up in my fear-based brain and said, I'm going to make that happen and go hunt this opportunity down. It's like most of our wins didn't come from us. It's like we allowed them, they arrived. I don't know. I don't know if that's making sense. Like, it's like the less I chase, the more I attract.
Yeah.
And again, it might sound a little too woo if somebody's listening and they're like, yeah, but I need a paycheck tomorrow. I need a paycheck like yesterday, But if you can just sort of take your agenda, your work hat, your needs off and put it on the shelf for a minute, and then embark upon your day with a sincere intention to be of value to whoever you get the opportunity to connect with, you're going to be so surprised by how quickly and how exponential the growth in your results can be.
Yeah. You mentioned something about having multiple kind of, hey, I took a leap of faith here moments. And when I look at most of the successful, entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, there's always, while fear is, a part of every decision I think that a lot of people make, at the same time, there's this abundance-based mindset that gives them permission to take this risk and to take this leap. What is your, personal mantra or thinking around taking risks? And, it might not feel like you've got all the dominoes lined up, which ultimately is what most people use as an excuse or reason to prevent them from going and taking an action that might completely transform their life in the best of ways. And yet they don't do it. What do you say to those who have that type of mentality and mindset, that have somewhat of this burning desire to do something different, to take a risk, to get out there and, step outside their comfort zone, and yet something keeps holding them back?
Well, there's an activity that I've done myself at different junctures when I caught myself saying, I can't do that because, right? So almost,
I still do that, by the way.
Totally.
I mean, right? Every level, they say every level has different devils, right? I mean, you would have told me 5 years ago that I would be buying hotels and doing that. I'd be like, man, that's crazy. I don't know about that, right? Now I'm like, well, what does it look like to buy $100 million hotel? Well, I can't do that because of this. Well, yes, I can. If I figured out the last level, I can figure this level out, right?
Yep. No, you hit the nail on the head, because you just said, if you asked me 5 years ago, and that's one of the activities is, if someone's listening, unless they're actually 20 years old, it's like, go back to your 20-year-old self and then look at how your life has transpired. So again, this is the same theme, but it's looking back to find clarity and confidence to move forward, because you said you need to have all the dominoes lined up. And there's a quote by Steve Jobs that says, you don't need to connect all the dots looking forward to take the first step. And you just have to start going, and then the dots will start to connect. And this reflection piece is so powerful, because so few people will slow down in order to do this type of reflection to get the perspective and then the confidence to move forward. But when you go back to your 20-year-old self in some area of your life, whether it's a health related thing, like you've climbed a mountain or you run a marathon or whatever, you've lost some weight, you've gotten strong, like something in your health has exceeded the expectations of your younger self, or maybe in some business success you've had or some financial success, maybe you've earned more money than your 20-year-old self would ever have believed to be possible. Somewhere you've exceeded the expectation of the belief system of a younger you.
Yeah.
You just said 5 years ago. It's like, yeah, you could go back 5 years, 10 years, and then evaluate the belief system you had then, and then point out how you proved yourself wrong. And I love that activity, because it's there to remind us that we never have any clue what we're really capable of, because we're always going to be limited by what we believe to be true based on the reality we've lived to date. And so every leap is in some capacity, a leap of faith. And the only difference between fear and faith is that we're looking at an imaginary future outcome, right? And fear is saying, what if it fails, right? Fear is looking at an imaginary future outcome and believing in the negative.
Yeah.
Faith is saying, what if it works? And what would that do for my life? And what's the actual worst case scenario? And so from there, it's like, when I find myself saying I can't, it's like, number one, I can't means I won't. I can't means I just close the door. It means I'm not willing to try. I'm not willing to explore how. And ultimately, I'm defending my own limitation, even though I can look back and see proof that it's all made up.
Yeah.
All my fear is made up, right? And so then it's like, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? So you go through all the worst case scenarios. A lot of the times, that leap you're thinking about, it could be hiring your first team member. It could be buying that building. It could be, relocating to a different location, or going on an epic adventure that you think is going to destroy your reputation in your business world. Like, there's all kinds of stories we have on why we can't do something that feels like a hell yes. And ultimately, when you look through the worst case scenarios, like this, and this, it usually is just that you come back to where you are right now. right? So the worst case scenario is you end up where you are right now. And if you're not feeling totally fulfilled where you are right now, then go for it. Like, just go for it. I mean, if you fail, you'll probably come back to where you are right now and you're figuring that out okay. But if you're called to something more, life is way too short to sit there analyzing what if it doesn't work. Just rewrite the story to say, what if it does? And then tap into that daydream a little bit and then start saying, well, how could I? And who do I need to talk to? Or can I hang around somebody that reminds me of my future? Can I hang around somebody who's done it before and start to borrow the belief I see in them? Mm-hmm. Or can I hire a coach and borrow the belief they see in me? Like, there is a way to get past what we can believe to be true by our limited minds.
I even think just, you said it, right? Just unshackling your mind and going, the programming of my brain and subconscious is there to protect me. But at the root and reality of it all is that anything is possible if I, give myself permission to believe that. Because going back to my 20-year-old self and thinking about, I was just excited to be able to think about the potential of flipping one house. And then a couple of years later, I was flipping, 50 houses a year. And then, the thought of even owning a residential property, let alone a hotel or a commercial property, that was just outside of my realm of thinking, right? But like, as you get older, I guess, get a little bit more experience, get a little bit more wisdom. And obviously, I think the failures are good context too, to, fall flat on your face and go, okay, I'm still breathing. I still got a pulse. My wife still loves me. My kids still think I'm awesome. I got my health. Like, okay, the things that really matter, I can get back into the saddle and figure out, what the next steps are. And I know most people who are entrepreneurs the regret of not trying is way bigger of a fear than the regret of failing and trying.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said there about, I'm still breathing. My wife still loves me. My kids still think I'm awesome, whatever. When COVID happened, I was running my mortgage business and I had a sizable team, and we decided we wanted to homeschool the kids. And then we decided to do a 6-month RV road trip and homeschool from this tiny little RV. And when we were out on the road, there was a huge wildfire that happened scarily close to our home. And I remember my sister going to that property and asking, what do we need from the house? And in case, this fire jumps this mountain and then this whole area is gone. And my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, gosh, what do we need? Like, what do we really need? We have almost everything we need right here in this tiny little RV. We have a few old pictures from grandpa in the war, things like that you can't replace. But for the most part, it was very humbling to realize that we had everything we need right here. And so when we came back from that experience and people were asking me, what was your biggest takeaway or whatever, I remember saying to somebody, my biggest takeaway is that there really are no rules, And I thought that trip was another leap that I thought people are going to stop referring business to me and my team because it's going to look like I've pieced out. I'm on this adventure. I'm on social media, traveling around.
That was one of your stories.
Oh, totally. And I prepared for the worst. I was like, okay, well, if my business has a huge decline because we choose to do this bucket list adventure, I've had declines before. I've been in this business a long time. I can always turn it on again. I did all the math. We rented out our house in a ski town. So that also funded our adventure just by Airbnb our house, near the ski resort. And so I, again, did the whole worst case scenario. So it's like, let's prepare for the worst. We ended up having a 50% increase in business while I was on the road.
Nice.
I think people are drawn to that. They're drawn to you living your authentic self and doing the thing. And so many of us have these constructs of what we should be doing, right? So it's like, well, I could never, I wish I could, but, and I always have people just like write that out, fill in the blanks. I wish I could, it would be amazing to, in my dream world, and then, but whatever follows but is your fear. And if you can just get intimate with it and write it out, then you can evaluate, is it true? Or is it just some made up belief in some imaginary future outcome that feels disastrous?
Yeah.
And true, And so often you take the risk anyway, and you find out later it was your best decision. So it's just kind of interesting. Like that whole hindsight piece is it's not just like hindsight's 20/20. I really believe that the hindsight and the reflecting back can empower you to move forward every time you're at those junctures where you feel like, yeah, but I can't do that. Like
Yeah.
I wish I could, but it's like,
And even if it is true, right? Going back to, hey, this is a real threat. Great. There's a plan to solve every one of those problems, or there's an option to mitigate a lot of those risks, and it's a lot of it is just like you said, creating space, taking time, getting clarity, asking the right questions, and finding ways to give yourself permission to take the next best decision that's aligned with the goals that you're trying to achieve. And I love that you just, before we were jumping on your mindset around, if not now, then when. And when I just always think about the five regrets of the dying on their deathbed, and how many people have those regrets of, man, I wish I would have done that then, but it was X, Y, and Z that stopped me from doing it. And when you really go back and probably replay a lot of those things that stop people from living their best life, a lot of it is constructs and things that are created by people who don't matter, who aren't living their best life, who aren't really going to help support you live yours. And you do these things or make these decisions based on these narratives that really are influencing you in a way that don't serve you maximizing the most out of your life. And so I love that you've done that so many times. And I've heard you say, build a life that you don't need a vacation from. What does that mean?
well, okay. When I was in the mortgage business and I was struggling to get off the ground, which we've all been there. I mean, I assume we've all been there if most of your listeners are entrepreneurs, when you're just trying to put the pieces together and you're a little anxious and you're worried, but you're also kind of excited and hopeful. It's hard to give yourself permission to be present in the joy of life because you're so preoccupied with what you should be doing, like I'm shoulding all over myself. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. And there's not enough hours in the day and all this stuff. And then eventually the business can grow. And in some cases it can really take off and exceed your own expectations. And that's what happened to me, where seemingly overnight, after developing this strategy that I put together after reading The Go-Giver, the business had more than doubled. I'm pregnant with my second child. I am making more money than I ever expected of myself. And I'm grateful for that, but I'm starting to crumble inside. I'm becoming a shell of myself. I'm never mentally, emotionally present, even when physically in the same space as my loved ones. I'm tethered to my phone from the moment my eyes open till they crash at night. Got a toddler, and I'm thinking to myself, like, this is not what I signed up for. Like, this doesn't feel like freedom and flexibility either. And I remember sitting with people that were what I consider to be ahead of me in the game, doing more volume than me. Their kids were a little older than me. And I asked them, how are you doing this? How are you surviving essentially your own success? And they all admitted that once they put their kids to bed, they were working until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And when we would go on vacation, I would work. And everybody would work when they were on vacation. Like, taking time off was unheard of. And all of this was kind of leading to what eventually became the name of my company, Pursuing Freedom, where I was like, hang on a second, didn't we become self-employed for a reason? And knowing what we know now, can we agree this isn't the easy route? Like, wouldn't getting a job be easier? Just clock in, clock out, do what you're supposed to do, get there on time and get paid, right? And so in theory, we take this leap of faith, we forego the steady paycheck in pursuit of some concept of freedom and flexibility. And it doesn't feel like that when you're broke, and it doesn't feel like that when you're burning out. And so at what point do you give yourself permission to actually enjoy the life that this is supposed to be affording you? And so it was after I moved to the ski town in 2016, and there's a bumper sticker that says, it's kind of obnoxious, but it's also funny. It says, my life is better than your vacation. And by this point, I luckily had not quit the business when I was burning out and drowning. I started to scale it. And so I got coaching to learn how to hire and when to hire and how to implement systems. And I started firing myself from everything that I don't enjoy. And I was left with a fraction of the responsibility, but really the highest and best use of my time. And I started to prioritize that me mountain biking every day or skiing every day or paddleboarding or hiking or just hanging out with people I care about actually fuels me energetically. And when I'm at my peak energy, I'm at my peak performance. And working more and never taking a break and working on vacations and never coming up for air is not actually a benefit to anyone I'm trying to serve, not personally or professionally. And I learned that the more I subtracted and the more I eliminated intentionally, just focusing in on the things I love to do and I'm good at and move the needle, the more impactful I became. And I now look at it like, think about how some entrepreneurs operate, just honestly on autopilot, running on fumes on a hamster wheel indefinitely with no direction, no clarity, no focus, low energy, sometimes low confidence, low consistency, all these things, right?
Yep.
Multitasking their way through the day. Just got to quick take that call, quick respond to that text, quick check that thing on social media, quick, this, that, bop, bop, And then think about your doctor operating on you or the dentist who, does the root canal. And imagine if while they're in the middle of surgery, there's like, real quick, let me just take this call. Real quick, let me just respond to this text message. Real quick, I'm just gonna do this, and this. Like, would you trust that person with your health? Someone who's so distracted, preoccupied, spread thin, somebody who doesn't rest, somebody who doesn't take vacation? Or would you want the most rested, the most focused, the most present version of your medical professional taking care of your most important needs? Yeah. So I think as entrepreneurs, we need to evaluate that identity we have and how we show up for our clients. And so I just started to tell myself, my clients deserve better. And I'm done making excuses for why I'm not living life. And instead, like my work was like the whale in the bathtub, and I was just trying to squish my life in around the edges. And so I just decided to reverse engineer that, put my life as the whale in the bathtub, design the business with intention to show up as my best self when I choose to show up for the external world, and ultimately live a life I don't need a vacation from. So it doesn't need to be postpone your enjoyment till someday when you give yourself permission to enjoy it. Like, enjoy your life. Again, chase the contribution, chase the joy, chase the way you want to feel today. And you'll be so surprised by how much more you see the limitless opportunities, doors opening, relationships showing up in your life. Like, it's so much easier when you're at ease.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a long-winded answer, but I get really fired up about that. I see people earning at a really high level and they're busy, like a badge of honor. And then you get behind closed doors with them and grown men and women are in tears, They're
Totally.
Just exhausted.
Yep.
And it's like, so when do we prioritize our well-being without fear that it's going to destroy what we've built? I believe it makes it better.
Yeah.
I believe it makes us better.
So talking a little bit more and pivoting over to your wealth building and obviously scaling your business, unlocking more freedom, generating more time through your financial freedom. What did it look like for when you started investing outside of your business, and what attracted you to those certain investments, and what's kind of been your investment philosophy as you've started to generate more wealth through your career?
Well, I always joke that we became accidental real estate investors because amidst all the chaos in 2008, we were able to buy our first house despite all the financial ups and downs. And we bought our first place in downtown Denver for $95,000 in 2008. And we were engaged. And after our son was born, it was just a little 1-bedroom row home. And after our son was born, we found a second property in the same neighborhood before we had listed the first one for sale. And so old school, we put it on Craigslist and said, what if we rent it? And the rental income on the first place was actually higher than the new mortgage payment on house number 2, which meant that our cash output was decreasing with this new inbound income. And so our overhead went down because of that rental income. And I was like, what? This is cool. And so,
I like this.
So as a mortgage lender, I started nerding out, telling all my clients and friends about this rental property and how it was working out for us. And then we bought our third house when we were expecting our second child. And it was actually 1 block over from property number 2. So we walked into that one. We kept property number 2. Then property number 4 was, funny enough, I was talking to a coach in 2015 and he wanted to know, some of my goals. And I said, well, in the 10-year plan is to have a condo in the mountains. And he's like, why not now? And I was like, I don't know. I guess this is to the point, right? Like, I can't do that. Well, yeah. I guess maybe I could try to figure that out. It turns out it wasn't really that hard. We had a ton of home equity in some of our properties. We were able to pull a down payment buy a little 70s time capsule in the mountains for 195,000, which was lucky. We've been very lucky being ahead of the path of growth with a lot of our investments. And it just kind of rolled from there. We've been living here in Winter Park since we bought that first place in 2015. We moved here full time in 2016, and we're in our 5th residence in the last 8 years. My 14-year-old has lived in 8 homes. So there is a point here that we've been willing to live non-conventionally in order to expand and amplify our wealth building journey. So there's been exponential growth, because as one worker bee is appreciating value, so is another, and so is another. And so finding ways to hold on to those properties was really impactful. And then through GoBundance, my mind just got blown with all the other things I could be doing out there. And I have to be careful, because there's so much that you learn in GoBundance that it can overwhelm you at first. And so I remember being in the room in 2021 thinking to myself, like, first of all, how do they let me in here? These people are so incredible, and just wow. And I've learned so much. So we started to diversify into passive investments and commercial syndications and out-of-state short-term rentals. And they haven't all been wins. We, in some capacity, I'll be honest, if I look back at the time that we got into the short-term rentals and the areas that we got into, we were on the tail end of the curve. And so those properties were not slam dunks for us. And there is an aspect of recognizing where you can start to go too far too fast, because you get so excited and you think anything is possible now. So it's like, I'm going to do all the things, right? And so we're working on really narrowing our focus so that we don't, we don't want to be reckless with saying yes to so many different things all at once, and really start to evaluate what's in alignment with our lifestyle goals.
Yes. Yeah, it's hard when you get in GoBundance to, well, one, it's exciting because you are exposed to the fact that there are so many different ways to make money, so many different ways to get ahead, and to invest in cool and exciting things. But just because you're given the opportunity to do something doesn't mean you always should. And I learned that the hard way too, in the beginning of getting into GoBundance and seeing all the different opportunities that people had their hands in. And to me, it also helped me narrow in on what is my core tree trunk of wealth. And David Osborne kind of taught me this one around, your whatever your core tree trunk of wealth is, build that to 10 mil. Then once you get to 10 mil, then the core tree trunk, the roots, they're planted, they're established. Then you can start exploring some of the branches off of that tree trunk and thinking about diversification. But when you think about so many people who have built wealth, it's really been in one singular vertical, and they've just gone really deep in it. They've been, become the expert in it. They've compounded those results over time and really established themselves and the stability in that. And then they start to, branch out and, hey, let me look at STRs. Hey, let me look at, syndication properties and things like that. And I love that you brought it up is, not all of these are wins, but, that's how you learn. That's how you go back and refine your strategy or sharpen some of the tools in your toolkit to help reflect on, hey, are these things aligned with our 5-year vision, our lifestyle goals, right? And kind of having that North Star. And so that's definitely been a learning. I think it's a learning curve that every entrepreneur and investor that's trying to get ahead has to go through. I'm also curious a little bit more about some of you've said coaches, you've said communities, you've said masterminds, talk about your maybe framework or intention and efforts that go into maximizing the ROI in every coaching relationship, every mastermind opportunity or experience, and some of the things that you've been able to pull out of it based on how you show up to those things.
It's interesting how you talk about that, the ROI piece, because I often find it to be really intangible. And what I mean by that is, even I hosted my first small women's retreat in December of 2023. And I had a gal asking me about the retreat, like, what's she going to get out of it, And all I could say is that ever since I got myself into different mastermind groups with, let's say, top producing real estate agents in my marketplace when I was a lender, and some people were ahead of me in the game and some were alongside me on the journey, but everybody had big visions. I elevated through association always. And it led into, hiring a high level coaching program for a couple years, specifically to learn how to scale my mortgage business. And I got a lot of hands-on support around, the process of onboarding and screening applicants and hiring, as well as the difficult conversations that might lead to parting ways and things like that. And so I had a lot of support through that journey of scaling my business. And in that, there were conferences, and I would go to these conferences. And I noticed just as time went on that I would come home to my husband, and I always kind of said the same thing. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I needed, but I came home and I feel so much more clear-headed. I've gotten clarity around something I was struggling with that I didn't even know I was struggling with until I heard somebody else talking about their exact same struggle and how they found their way to the other side of it. And I was able to pick their brain and come home with there's something about removing yourself from your own environment that gives you the space to access clarity that I think is so powerful. And it's kind of just become a non-negotiable. I don't need to know what I'm going to get out of being a part of GoBundance the last 4 years. But what I do know is that every time I engage, every time I show up to one of the events and I plug into a micro tribe call or whatever, it always helps me, like I said earlier, either borrow the belief I see in somebody else. I see you're doing something, Matt, and it's like, oh my God, I never even thought about that, right. Or wow, he was where I was just a year and a half ago, and look at where he is now, just by some decisions that he's made, or some pivots, or some fine tuning, and maybe I could get in the room with him and pick his brain, and maybe I can get there a little faster or whatever. Or sometimes it's borrowing the belief someone sees in you. Yeah. We're always going to have our limiting beliefs. There's no outgrowing it. So there's times where I might say something, not even realizing I just was self-deprecating or playing small. And somebody in the room calls me out on it and is like, what are you talking about? You can 100% do this. And you should, because da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, cool. All right. So there's just so much power in spending time with people that remind you of your future and how you elevate by association. And again, so much of it is just unscripted. It's I don't know. I'm just coming into this day curious to see how it unfolds.
Totally.
And if I'm present and I'm curious, I notice more. And then I follow the breadcrumbs. If I have an impulse to do something, I'm just going to do it nowadays. I'm not overanalyzing what someone's going to think of me, because I'm just coming from a place of curiosity and love and authenticity. And I'm letting it unfold instead of needing to know how it's going to unfold.
Yeah, that seems to be the best approach and way that leads us to at least the greatest value that I think you either know or you don't maybe know at the time that you're looking for, but you get it, especially when you show up in that capacity. And I have done a couple exercises over the years of going what was my ROI on this investment into, because certain years, you get your membership and then you go to a couple events and you're 20, 30 grand into a mastermind group, right? And, for me, I'm always looking at, okay, well, did I get an ROI there? And oftentimes on paper, all the time, I'm getting an ROI. You get a deal, you get a referral, somebody invests with you, whatever. But then, like you said, there's these intangibles of this guy shared this nugget with me on how he, communicates with his daughter, and that pays dividend for the rest of my life. Yep. This guy gives me a framework on how him and his wife interact and how they stay connected in the chaos of raising, all the kids. That pays dividend in a season of my life that could be way more important than any, $1 million check that I cashed that year. Right. And so thinking about those things, the intangibles of ROI in your, network, in your masterminds, in your coaching, and just the investments you're making in yourself, I think is always, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think so many people go, if I invest 10 grand into coaching, I better make 10 grand back or else it wasn't worth it. Right. But you forget to think about how all the skills, the ahas, the relationships, the data points that you can connect the dots on pay dividend going forward for the rest of your life. You're never the same because of those things. So I love that you brought that up. And obviously being a part of GoBundance, you being in women's group, me being in the men's group, I think we can both attest that not as a commercial or anything, right? That GoBundance has given us a ton of value. So if you are a high net worth individual and you want to be around other like-minded people, whether you're male or female, there's two different groups. You can always check out GoBundance.com. I always love to give a little plug for GoBundance just because of the impact they've made in my life. But I also know people are going to want to connect with you. They're going to know more about what you got going on, the content, the coaching, a lot of the stuff that you do. What's the best place for them to find you, Erin?
Sure. So I love connecting with people, just genuinely, because I feel like creativity comes out of conversation, and you never know, like I said, unscripted, what can come. So if anybody is listening and just wants to reach out, you can message me on Instagram at Pursuing Freedom Official. Pursuing Freedom is the name of my organization. So it's pursuingfreedom.com. You can email me, Erin at pursuingfreedom.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Even if you just had a takeaway, an aha, like it makes my day when Matt, we're sitting here putting these podcasts out. I have my podcast, and sometimes we're just putting this content out to the ether, and you're just fingers crossed, hoping it's making an impact on somebody. So
Totally.
If it does, and somebody shares that, I'm like, yes, it's making an impact. This is all, that fills me up, and it energizes me, and it inspires me to keep going. So yeah, I love meeting people. I love masterminding. I love connecting. So by all means, please reach out.
Well, we'll be sure to link up all of your website, your social handles on Erin's episode at millionairemindcast.com. Erin, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.